Thank you, Dipankar, for the invitation. I missed the condolence meeting at the department because I was out of station. Yeah. Well, I had no idea about André when I was doing my MA at Pune University because the course structure was so Personian, so Americanized, that there was very little of space for studying Indian society. I still remember there was one paper on Hindu social organization, and the other paper was the caste, peasant, and tribe, and urban community. That's all. It's when I moved to the IIT Kanpur for my PhD, and I was student of Professor D.N. Thanagre, who has just come back from Sussex, and his PhD thesis was on the peasant movements in India. And while he was offering a course on agrarian studies, that is when I got really exposed to André's work. And eventually agrarian studies became something on which I got really obsessed, and my thesis was on agrarian structure. Let's see, in North Bengal, it was a study of plantation and peasant settings in North Bengal. And my first encounter with him was when I first applied for a job at Northeastern University. At the time, it was being held at UGC. And when I went there, I realized, and I was aware that there was Professor André Béteille and Patricia Uberoi in the committee. André just asked me, have you completed your PhD thesis? I said, well, I have just submitted it, and he just wanted to have a look at it. And then he posed questions, basically, which is very fond of class structure, Marx and Max Weber, and so on and so forth. I responded to, in a way I could do it. And then when Oberoi came, and he says that, tell us, why should we give you a job at Northeastern University? And I started justifying, as to the ecology and the economy and the people sharing, let's say, Assam and North Bengal. And Oberoi told me, well, that is nothing else for the Bengali imperialism. Your argument doesn't make sense. But anyway, I got a job. And since then, that was my first encounter. And then my second encounter was when I came for the Viva from Northeastern University. And it so happened that André was the examiner. And he was leading the board in IIT. And one thing I remember is that he asked me, Virginius, can you tell me that when you go to the village, how will you identify who is peasant? And I was just beating around the bush of the characteristics, features, etc. And he says he was not satisfied. I said, I'm asking you, how do you really recognize a peasant? And he said, so I was fumbling and all this. Well, the best way to recognize him is to look at his hand. And if you shake his hand and you find that it's very rough, you know that he is a peasant. And so he has all this. But then Nehu used to come because I think when he was UGC national professor, he chose Nehu as one of the place to visit and spend a week with us. And that is when I heard first time Professor Béteille's lectures. His public lectures, 3 or 4 lectures that he gave. That was my first listening to him as a teacher. And everyone really were very spellbound with the clarity and the flow that he spoke. And I think that is when I realized that later on when I used to meet Delhi school product at different places, everyone was in awe. And everyone used to have a great praise for André Béteille. And it so happened that eventually I joined Delhi School of Economics, and André was my neighbor, and we used to discuss various things, etc. And what I remember him is that, he will bring out, I think the discussions were always serious. And one of the things that I find is that when I realized that the personality of him as a teacher, I had not been taught about, but then everyone used to tell about his teaching, etc. But when he retired, he said, Virginius, would you like to take the notes that I have? So he gave me notes on the economy and society, gave notes on political sociology, gave notes on religion and society. And when I saw it, I realized that how meticulously he used to prepare his lecture notes. Enormously, the way in we do PowerPoint presentation, exactly on the way he used to frame up questions in his lectures materials. And I think he was, I would still remember, I think he is a teacher. For him, who was not really a profession, but he had really a vocation, a Calvinistic sense of what you call the calling. I think he had a calling, and he really took teaching as one of the most foremost duties. He is, of course, a well-known scholar, but my associations with him in terms of scholarship was that his agrarian studies that really brought me to him. And I really understand that the kind of categories in terms of which people has to understand the agrarian social structure. But in the course of time, I was more interested in the agrarian labor, and he keep on asking me, Virginius, what do you think of this, what is happening in the tribal communities in Gujarat, this happening here? And he will just nudge me. And then with conversations, I started drawing me into the interest of the tribal studies. And then when eventually came the Oxford component to sociology, social anthropology, he asked me, why don't you contribute a paper on that's with Vinay Das and over here. That's the starting point I had. And I think his conceptions of the tribe was very different from the others, this whole monographic studies. He told me that as a MA student at Calcutta University, he did a field work in a village, which was Uran village, which belongs to a tribe I belong. And then talking about what's called the tribal questions, again, he looked at a very different way. But in the sense we're all talking about coordinate, he looks at not really in terms of evolutionary sense, but really puts it in terms of more historical categories. So he looks at as to how, let's say, tribes outside of Indian civilization, that was not the way in which it was really being thought about. But this interesting idea of the fact that how do you really look at tribes as outside of a society or outside of a state or outside of a civilization, that's the way. And then there's a constant interactions between. That's a new ideas that was there. Subsequently, you find that he, with all these international indigenous people, etc., he was the first one to again engage with the questions of indigenous people in India. And in fact, we have really followed on that. So I think, so personally, I really feel is that he has mentored me, not really explicitly, but that in the way in which he had been in terms of personal communications. And I think he was an institutional builder, and when I was the head of a department and we really had difficulties, he stood with me as a pillar. And I really deeply remember even when I was out of stations, because he used to visit my family, knowing very well that my wife was not doing well quite often. And he spent time. And when I came to know about it, I was deeply touched. So fundamentally, he's a great scholar, great teacher. And I think that is a legacy that he has left. And for me personally, I have a very personal legacy of he mentoring me in a very informal way of what I am today. Thank you.